G'day freedom lovers and patriots, I'm your host George Christensen, former Australian Member of Parliament, and this is Nation First, a show dedicated to finding out the truth and pulling back the curtain on the globalists for all to see. We believe in defending our sovereignty and democratic free way of life, and that we have to be on the right side of history by resisting the Great Reset. Now make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to this channel and click the bell to get the alerts when we have more news to help you push back on the Great Reset. Let's dive in. If you're like me, you're sick of seeing the global elite telling everyday citizens how to live, what to eat, and how much energy to use. Somehow, we've let the people flying around in private jets wearing $10,000 suits be the ones calling the shots in this postmodern world that we're all living in. The 1% are growing their wealth while pushing for an ESG way of living that affects the 99% of us in a way that's detrimental to our way of living. The middle class is being wiped out and the real economy is in an epic freefall as we speak. The further along this ESG agenda gets pushed and that ESG policies fall into place, the quicker that we, the common people, are going to feel the blows. Now, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. It sounds nice, but it's the globalist utopia that benefits them and hurts us. We're already seeing nations that have gone green with ESG policies suffer calamity and ruin. Sri Lanka, for instance, they had a 98 out of 100 ESG score, and as you'd be aware, that country's collapsed economically, so much so that the president got ran out of town. We're seeing Europeans suffer from astronomically high power bills, and we're witnessing BlackRock and other mega corporations scoop up entire suburbs of family homes at record low interest rates, forcing American citizens to get used to the idea of becoming a nation of renters. Yes, a two-tiered society is being formed right before our very eyes, the haves and the have-nots. The equitable world that the so-called elite are pushing for will be anything but equitable. Once again, communism and Marxism are being dressed up and glamorized with slogans like tax the rich, eat the rich. They're just but two of those sort of slogans that those in power, the real rich, have used over the last few years to program the youth to not only despise those who've had a go and gotten a go, but to crave for socialist policies and for a socialist government. The only problem with that is that the idea of socialism has failed 24 times over the past century or so, and yet it can't seem to get out of our political discourse. There's a lot going on in our world right now that we need to be aware of. Today, we're going to dive in on ESG and the institutions, corporations, and individuals that are behind them. We've got so much to discuss in today's episode, so let's learn how ESG is a scam. It's estimated right now that by next year, 800 million people will potentially starve to death with the food shortages happening right around the globe. Not to worry though, the United Nations has confirmed that food shortages are necessary to create cheap slave labour. An article touting the benefits of world hunger for a cheap, motivated workforce was actually published in a United Nations journal many years ago. Now, after it came to light in recent months, it was scrubbed from the internet. But it remains. The crux of the article was that the elite class had a distinct motivation to not end world hunger because if everyone was well nourished, there may be no one willing to provide cheap labour and slave away at some of the most physically demanding and unpleasant jobs on this planet. The United Nations said the article was merely satire, but that's a claim the article's author has denied. That aside, let me go back to the figure that I led with. 800 million people are likely to starve to death over the course of the next year. Remember that devastating figure as we look at how ESG has destroyed and will destroy traditional farming. It's very clear that the so-called elite and their institutions and corporations are all moving in this green ESG direction, whether we like it or not. We're seeing the ramifications of their ridiculous policies all over the world. Farmers are getting arrested while mega corporations are getting carbon tax credits. That's right, getting money for something That's naturally occurring. The downfall of Sri Lanka has been washed away by many mainstream media outlets, but if you do some digging, you'll see that the country has completely collapsed. Now, Sri Lanka was promised to be one of the wealthiest countries by the year 2025, and exactly the opposite has occurred. Within weeks of President Mahinda Rajapaksa's decree to go green, rice production was down 20%. Scarcity sent food prices through the roof. Farmers who either could not or would not make the green transition let roughly 1/3 of that country's farmland lie fallow. By any standard, Rajapaksa's decision was a disaster. ESG standards create poverty like small pebbles trigger an avalanche, says Michael Austin, who's president of Knowledge and Decisions Economic Consulting. ESG standards are driven by a left-wing vision that actively ignores the disastrous consequences it creates, he says. There's a saying that if you're a business that goes woke, you will soon go broke. For decades, it was a shibboleth that when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. America's global impact was such that nations around the globe felt a ripple effect from whatever bumps in the road the United States economy encountered. But as Sri Lanka is arguably the first country to topple itself due to an untoward and unrealistic attachment to its own kind of Green New Deal, it's fair to wonder what will happen now that Sri Lanka has sneezed. It's a cautionary tale, and one in which a number of indebted emerging market nations will have to deal with, given various ripple effects from the island's collapse. Countries including Laos, Lebanon, Pakistan, and Zambia are believed not to have enough foreign currency reserves to last more than 2 or 3 months. Sri Lanka is now doing a dance with the International Monetary Fund to secure loans and bridge funding. This is likely to lead to pitfalls of a greater magnitude rather than providing a roadmap out of their existing troubles. The International Monetary Fund solution is nearly always to go into more debt to fix your existing debt problems, and also to institute harsher economic and ESG policies. I wish Sri Lanka the very best of British luck with that one. In the words of Jeff Foxworthy, you can't fix stupid. Sri Lanka's downfall helps expose some of the dangers of counting on ESG policies to bolster an economy. ESG could be the internet bubble of this decade, says Bruce Clark, chief macro strategist at Informa Global Markets. The ESG movement effectively shames institutions into a kind of hollow virtue signalling. Sri Lanka didn't have the green technology to carry out President Rajapaksa's diktat. Indeed, much of the technology needed doesn't even exist yet, at least not at scale. Clark continued by saying, with the passage of time, I think it will be ultimately seen as a giant sham. I couldn't agree more. And we're seeing the effect of that giant sham in our grocery stores, in our food supplies, and in our spiralling cost of energy to heat and cool our homes. But not everyone is feeling the pinch. Some are actually doing the pinching. BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world with a balance sheet of around $10 trillion, is using your money to push ESG. Vivek Ramaswamy, an American entrepreneur, went on the Glenn Beck show and spilled the beans on the insiders making big moves and big bucks to push this agenda right now. He told Beck this, and I want to quote him at length here.
This is the largest asset manager in the world, managing over $10 trillion, around $10 trillion. It's about half the U.S. GDP in the hands of one firm. And if you add Vanguard and State Street to the list, the top three, they manage more than the U.S. GDP. And what they do is they're aggregating the money of everyday citizens. Probably most people listening to this program, actually. Probably you and me included. We don't know it through our 401k accounts, through pension fund accounts, et cetera. And what they do is they use that money to advocate for these ESG policies in corporate America. Climate change plans, emissions caps, diversity, equity, inclusion, quota systems for race and gender on boards, et cetera. They use our money to advocate for those principles in corporate America that makes companies less successful. And as we've seen this year, has actually contributed to stock market declines as well, in my opinion. And the ESG specific funds this year, Glenn, have actually underperformed the broader market as a whole, even though the broader market as a whole has already done badly enough. And I think a big part of why the broader market has done badly is in part because of the demands of these ESG-linked asset managers. But the ESG-specific funds have done even worse. So the answer to your question is there a downturn because of the broader market, or is it because of the failures of ESG? The answer is both, because part of the reason the broader market is turning down is exactly because of some of these toxic policies that cause companies to focus on these orthogonal social agendas.
So our money, our retirement funds and superannuation or 401k plans and the like, that is what is being used to push ESG. That is what is being used to push this great reset. Not only that, but US taxpayer funds have gone into BlackRock, with the US Federal Reserve hiring that investment behemoth to oversee various programs and projects that it runs. BlackRock has famously pushed ESG policies on corporations right around the world, and it can because its tentacles stretch far and wide. You'd be very surprised to see how many companies in the USA, in Australia, in Canada, in the UK, and in most other Western and even non-Western nations ultimately have BlackRock as its dominant parent investment company. Well, either BlackRock or Vanguard. And guess what? BlackRock is the part owner of Vanguard, and Vanguard is part owner of BlackRock. You couldn't make this stuff up. You really couldn't. Anyway, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink wrote to companies all around the world telling them to get out of fossil fuels. Why? Why? Why do you think that would be the case? Do you think multinational corporations, the richest of the rich, the masters of the universe, actually give two stuffs about the environment? Or is there another reason? As always, follow the money. The powers that be aren't pushing this ESG agenda, this green agenda, for the Earth's benefit or for our benefit, but for their own benefit. They've invested heavily in all of the new forms of energy and in carbon credit schemes and the like. They've also invested heavily in alternatives to traditional farming, like bug factories and lab-grown meat. These Rockefellers of green energy are happy to destroy the livelihoods of everyday citizens and uplift the lives of themselves, who may yet be the only ones able to afford steak, Teslas and private jets. As I said earlier, we're entering into an era of the haves and the have-nots. The two-tiered society is coming. Maybe it's here. Are you prepared? I conclude with this. So much is happening in real time, but we have to be aware of the freedoms we may lose in order for this great reset agenda to come to pass. We will own nothing and be happy, for instance. And we're already seeing the powers that be seize land from farmers who aren't complying with their policies. We're seeing bank accounts frozen for those who don't go along with the rules and regulations of the globalists. We're seeing political activists who oppose this sort of corruption rotting in jail cells. And we've even seen the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who opposed the Great Reset, being raided by the politicized FBI and Department of Justice. That's clearly in collusion with the Biden administration and the shadow government that's giving him his marching orders. We have to be on high alert and make sure we're living in a way that best benefits our families. We've got strength in numbers, and if we resist their Great Reset, they will have to deviate from their plans. The so-called elite know they don't have enough data, they don't have enough resources, and they don't have enough support behind them to control 8 billion people worldwide. And as much as they continue to push foul communist and Marxist ideologies onto our youth, we have to remember that that leftist agenda has failed each and every time it's been tried. We can be confident that they won't be able to pull it off this time around, but that doesn't mean they won't end up destroying things that we value, such as freedom, along the way. We need to stay curious, stay prepared, and stay informed. And that's why you should like this video, subscribe to this channel, and click the little bell for more alerts. I'll see you next time. Until then, God bless you, your family, and our nation. I'm George Christensen.